Today, we're very happy to have Jill Sweatman, known as the Brain Whisperer, from Sydney, Australia. She is a neuroscience communicator who works in learning and development. And along with Jill, we have Dr. Patrick Quaid. Dr. Quaid is an optometrist at the View Cubed Vision Therapy Clinics in Guelph and North York, Ontario. He's the author of Learning to See, Seeing to Learn, Vision, Learning, and Behavior in Children. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here.
Well, let me ask you a kind of big picture question. As you look down through history, it really wasn't that long ago in the whole sense of human history that people learned to read, unless you were a scholar and you had those manuscripts that you were working on. It was only the Gutenberg press being invented and books being written and pamphlets being published that more and more people started to read. And obviously that had an impact on the way our brains worked. Is what we're going through right now with screens and digital technology and having things up close, is this just another part of the evolution? And if so, what are the pros and cons of that? What are the risks? What should we be doing and thinking about for ourselves, for our children, and for the future? Jill, do you have some thoughts on that?
Oh, Grant, I certainly do. With anything that is new, particularly today where globally and societally we are enticed, we are tantalized, we are seduced into thinking that the new is the big and the best and more and more and more is required. What concerns me is that there is much research to show that the earlier you introduce digital devices to children has a profound effect. May I share some research that was done, funnily enough, in your hometown, Canada, from the University of Alberta, another one of the universities, which looked at the amount of time that young children were exposed to digital devices. So they did a control group and very important research, and it was longitudinal, I might add, but they looked at young children around the 2, 3, 4 age group who were using in excess of 2.5 hours of screen time per day versus children who had less than 30 minutes. What they showed that by the time those children reached school years, so this was 3 or 4 years later, that those children who had in excess of 2.5 hours of screen time were 3 times as likely to have a clinically diagnosed behavioural condition. In other words, they couldn't sit still, they were always moving around, they couldn't focus. And disturbingly, they were almost 8 times as likely to meet the criteria for ADHD by the time they reach school. Now, for me, this is profound. And the research that's been done in Australia, I'm not proud to say that we are 4 times over the World Health Organization guidelines for screen time. This is not something of which I'm proud at all. So guidelines are there for a reason. And I think that schools, families, parents, grandparents, who of course want to be the best for their grandchild, think that putting a device in front of them is really supportive of them. And I know that this is affecting the structure of their brain and the density of their brain. I don't think in some ways we have a more important topic. Patrick, I'd be interested in what you're saying.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I'm starting to see digital devices, and I hate to say it, almost being used as a pacifier. I was walking down the street the other day with my wife, and we saw somebody across the street walking the other way with a push pram, and it actually had a holder for the iPhone on the front of the push pram. And I'm sitting there going, the child wants to observe the parent's face, and when we're in the clinic and you look at the development of the visual system, unlike the inner ear, which is fully formed at 48 days gestation, which I find fascinating, the visual system is not fully formed until about 2.5 years post-birth. So we don't actually generate convergence, for example, until we're 4 months old. So there's a lot of post-birth development that occurs very rapidly within the first, from birth pretty much till age 6 or 7 and beyond. But a lot of the rapid changes will occur in that birth to 6 years old range. So when you have a young infant and their head is just stuck in an iPad and they're converging up close, one of the critical things that you're actually ignoring is peripheral vision. And peripheral vision is actually one of the few visual areas that's somewhat functional at birth. Of course, we don't develop central detail acuity like the 20/20 on the eye chart roughly until 2.5, or 3. So the peripheral machinery is intact, is functional at a very young age. So it's very, very plastic. It's very critical, and it's very important in determining how your eyes align. So if I have my face stuck in an iPad, what's going to happen is the brain is going to start to not really pay attention to the periphery. And we've seen studies coming out of Japan and the UK showing that myopia, or, when people go blurry in the distance, one of the strongest protective factors for myopia is time spent outdoors. So it's how much peripheral exposure am I getting? So back to Grant's point about the reading, I mean, if we condense our existence as a species into 24 hours, we've been reading for, relatively speaking, 10 seconds, right? So, reading is certainly not a natural thing for the visual system to do. Doesn't mean we shouldn't read, but it's not natural. So we have to adapt current existing visual machinery. We have to adapt what I like to call fringe visual skills, right? So we have to hijack current visual areas that do certain things to be able to be tweaked to read. And that sounds odd, but we actually use the same part of our brain that we use for facial recognition. We use that very same area for word recognition. Because if you think about the word yacht, it's not spelled how it sounds. We don't sound it out in our head, yacht. We look at it, we recognize it just like I'd recognize a face. So on that lines, there's certain adaptations to fringe visual machinery that are productive, like being able to read. But I think the current situation that we're in now, children are getting exposed to technology younger and younger and younger and younger. My daughter's 8, and I can tell you she's nowhere near a digital device. We're really putting our foot down because I'm seeing it in the clinic. Even during the COVID-19 lockdowns, we're seeing a lot more kids going myopic faster. We're seeing kids develop inward eye turns. There's actually been papers published on that even within the last 6 months. So I think there's a definite, to your point, Jill, there's a physical effect on the visual system by prolonged exposure up close. And I really feel parents need to be aware of this. And there's also the other factor of what I call basket babies, where we have these babies that are, constantly in a car seat, or, kids need to be out moving. They need to be crossing their midline. They need to be, the human body was designed to move. It was not designed to be static, sitting in front of a computer screen. And I think you're right, Jill. I think it's one of the most important topics, probably as a society, that we need to be talking about right now.
Well, it's good to hear you concur with that. And you said so much that relates to what I'm seeing. I mean, anecdotally, and you'd be interested to know that I notice children who have done too much work with a digital device. And I noticed that one of their little eyes is slightly turned, and I might be the only one who actually sees it. And I remember many years ago, I had a young girl that I was working with, and I said to her mother, I think you really need to have her eyes tested. And the very next time I went to tutor her, as I was working with her, she just stood up, and next thing I knew, I had these little arms around my waist and this head buried into me, cuddling me. And I realized that she realized that I had seen her. I had identified one of her problems that was getting in the way. When you talk about parents with devices on prams, I tell you what, there's no shortage of it in Sydney town. And if we look from a clinical perspective, from a medical perspective, from a psychological perspective, children's brains only grow in the first 18 months of their life in direct response to looking at an adult's face, preferably their mother. The work that was done with the Romanian babies told us all we needed to know about that. And what I'm concerned about is that we're not getting a generation of babies, or are we getting a generation of children who are misreading facial cues? Sometimes mum's there for me and or dad, or, my carer or my grandparent, and they're with me. And then the next moment they're not. And that is very confusing to a child psychologically. It's also interfering with the way they're perceiving visual cues. Mm-hmm. I think this is critical. And to your point about myopia, the late Professor Brian Holden, and you would know his name, Patrick, from your work, determined that by the year 2020, myopia would be the greatest cause of blindness. And we are inculcating this. This is not something that doesn't have to happen. This is something where we're not encouraging, as you said, people to get out and enjoy the distance and for horizon to be determined. Perhaps our horizon societally should be exactly that we should be taking children away from devices and presenting nature and the rest of the world to them.
And I think the, the notion of Hebb's law, nerves that fire together wire together, that can be for good or for bad, and we need to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So much to understand, and the big vision, the big picture, the big horizon, difference we can all make in our own stories, but especially in the stories of children, grandchildren, and those in our care. Well, this has been great. Thank you for a great conversation on this important topic and so many more things that we can talk about. We've been joined today by Jill Sweatman, the brain whisperer. You can visit her website, learn many more things, lots of good resources there for you to enjoy and to learn. And also Dr. Patrick Quaid, who's the author of Learning to See, Seeing to Learn, Vision, Learning, and Behavior in Children. Thank you both for making it an interesting conversation.
Thanks for having us.